CEOs under pressure on tariffs, retailers in particular trying to avoid spooking consumers, at the same time spooking or angering the president, who suggested recently that Walmart should, quote, eat the tariffs. For more on how businesses can message their messaging and their moves at the same time, I want to bring in Paul Argenti. He's the professor of corporate communications at Dartmouth's Tuck School of Business. Let's just first start with the bigger idea, which is we've heard from a number of retailers, Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, Target, you can go down the list. We heard Nike this morning say they're actually raising prices, but appear to not mention tariffs. Should we all assume that all of this is tariff related? Those who are saying that they're not raising prices, how should we think about this before we even get into the messaging piece?
Yeah, definitely we should think about it in the context of tariffs because it's on all of those companies' minds, right? And I think this is where basic communication strategy is going to come in handy because you have a lot of constituencies to satisfy here. Start with your shareholders who, they won't want to hear about uncertainty or negative feelings about it. They want to know what you're doing about it. So you need to be transparent, proactive, adaptable, explain how it affects you. And I think that's exactly what we see them doing. I think Walmart is in the trickiest position, obviously, because the president, poked directly at them, for sure.
In terms, though, of how you can message to the president in one direction and consumers in the next and shareholders in the next, and if, in fact, you do need to raise prices, how would you do that?
Yeah, I think that's the incredibly fine line that companies need to walk. Walmart has openly stated they have a commitment to low prices, and they're going to figure out other ways to try to mitigate the effects of tariffs. They're going to acknowledge that there is an impact, but they're talking about the kind of strategic measures they're taking to try to deal with suppliers to, handle this. And they're also saying they're going to absorb some of the costs themselves. That is music to the ears, certainly, of the president and I think customers. So I think that's how you do it. You have to try to figure out how to do it. But the most important thing here, Andrew, is that you need to be clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and explain how it affects you and explain why you're doing what you're doing. And I think, you're going to be fine if you do that.
Paul, the other audience, of course, is the shareholder base. They don't particularly want to hear that you're going to be slashing your margins to eat all of the additional pressures and costs that are coming.
Right. And I think that the problem, however, is that there's no other way around this. This is going to have an effect on you, and you have to try to figure out how to deal with it. I think price increases certainly are going to be happening from some of these organizations, and we already see that happening, and that's one way to ameliorate some of the effects that shareholders will see from your actions. But you're in a lot of pressure here. You're between a rock and a hard place, and I think that threat from the White House forces your hand on which constituency you need to focus on the most and who you need to satisfy. I don't think you have a choice here because the effect will be even worse if you don't do what you need to do here.
So, okay, let's just go through, though. I'm curious what you think the reaction will be. So you had Lowe's and Home Depot try to suggest that they are going to eat these costs. If, in fact, and they've maintained their guidance for the rest of the year, if, in fact, between now and the end of the year, their prices actually go up, or at least some of them go up, and they don't hit their guidance, they have to actually, or they come in on the low end of the guidance, do you think that the shareholders, therefore, will hold them accountable for that in some way? Or do you think they'll say, we understood effectively that you had to say that you weren't doing this because the other outcome is that the president would somehow come after the company and that would have hurt us in some other way?
Yeah, I think that's the logic that, unless they're living under a rock, you have to understand the pressure that's coming to these businesses and that they don't really have a choice other than to do what they did. And I think if they're savvy in the way they're handling it, and you're focusing on operational efficiency, supplier relationships, looking at the different kinds of investments you've made to already deal with this in before it even happened, I think you're going to be okay. And if the market chastises them for that, they're not paying attention to what's going on.
Paul, there are laws in this country about telling the truth, especially because disclosure laws. So
Yep.
what I don't, and maybe this is an SEC that will not be prosecuting anybody just at all for other reasons. But historically, if there was a series of emails between the CEO and the CFO and a whole bunch of other people saying, we're probably going to have to raise our prices on this product and this product, and then they come out and they say, well, we're not doing that for whatever reason because they don't want to scare the president. Historically, in discovery, if that were to come out, that would be a problem.
It would. And your question is, will it be a problem now?
I think where I'm going with this.
I think you you can pull a Nike and say, you know, we always look at blah, 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 the overall environment, blah, blah, and we decided this makes sense now, blah, blah. You know what's more crazy, Professor Paul, is when you hear President Trump say, well, you know, Walmart better eat it because they made a lot of money last year, a lot more than if they made. That sounds like Elizabeth Warren. That does not sound like a Republican. That sounds like Elizabeth Warren saying, you know, that's next thing you know, there's a windfall profits tax because they're making too much money. That's like crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, though, he is feeding his base. I mean, there is sentiment
right.
there.
The populist, and it's not the only time we're seeing it, but it's like topsy-turvy, fair as foul, upside-down world.
Does that explain some of the action in the bond market? And, Paul, I know you're not an expert on the bond market per se, but look, people are saying, oh, nobody was paying attention to this when this was Joe Biden. People expect Democrats to blow out the deficits. They don't expect that from Republicans. This is a new breed of republicanism, and if you never have anybody who's going to cut back and say, no, we're not going to do this spending, it's a new world you're living in.
Totally. And you better get used to it and get ready for it.
There was at one point in the past, I did argue that how well the stock market had done for 20 years and how well shareholders had done while wages remained somewhat stagnant. And I could almost see making the case for, I mean, it's hard to imagine because it goes against Adam Smith and everything else, but I could almost see how in a populist world, people might actually nod about this, that shareholders have done great. Let's have, let's try to rebuild the middle class that got hollowed out from all the jobs moving, overseas, and let's try. I could almost see how you make that case. And I think that's people that are making that case are in President Trump's ear.
Yeah, and I think it also is kind of like a Nixon in China thing. You have a Republican conservative who's doing this. It's going to be a lot easier to get it done than Elizabeth Warren, for sure.